And I'm really looking forward to this debate because I believe that a lot of people try to put everybody on the left in one little box and everybody on the right on one little box. And I love that it's a left on left debate, so we can, show some open-mindedness, so we actually engage with what people are saying and not with the ghosts in our head that we're debating because we think we know what they're already going to say. So my stance is basically can be summed up by a lot of films or literature from the past, like Frankenstein or Jurassic Park. It's nature finds a way. And I think that, like Frankenstein, creating Frankenstein's monster, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that I love science. I think science can help us, understand nature better. But when we think we know better than nature, I think that leads to destruction. So that's my stance.
All right. Nihilist.
Right. So the most common criticism of eugenics I've seen is with respect to its historical track record. Admittedly, Nazis and white supremacists have a tendency to ruin everything they touch, but I am not a right-winger in any ideological sense. The idea that eugenics is tied to racism is about as valid as equating socialism to gulags. Just like socialism, some elements of eugenics are present in modern-day society. For example, laws prohibiting incest are designed with genetic diseases in mind. Most of us accept some degree of control over who should and should not reproduce. The real question is how far we should take it, but my goal in this debate is merely to destigmatize eugenics as a legitimate area of moral and political consideration. It's obvious to people across the political spectrum that raising children is a demanding activity, one that should probably be paid. If so, how come we'll allow any teenage fool to get pregnant and occupy one of the most important jobs in society? My position is simply the application of two universal principles to people who have not yet been created. First, that in addition to quality education and upbringing, children have a right to healthy minds and bodies which allow them to succeed in life. Second, that reproduction is not a human right, but a gross violation of the child's consent. In addition, the ecological and social costs of creating another hungry mouth are devastating to the millions of immigrants waiting to come into the country, orphans in need of parents, and billions of animals killed for food every year. Conceptually, there's a very high burden of proof for prospective parents to demonstrate a child is worth creating. In terms of actual policy, I support a gradualist approach, cautious of the failures of previous eugenic movements. This would include mandatory genetic screening for prospective parents paid for under Medicare for All. A couple with incompatible genes could select or be provided an alternative biological parent. Funding toward direct genetic engineering and designer babies would be increased. In the long term, I support selecting for certain characteristics like intelligence and athletic ability, but these are secondary to the primary ethical considerations of eugenics as a disease prevention policy.
Whose noise is that in the background? Is that?
I'm sorry.
That
Let
you?
me try to find my mute button. Yeah,
No, it's
kids
fine. I think Nihilist
kids and
was,
wife coming home.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Maybe just mute it when you're not talking. But I think Nihilist was
Yeah,
your opening.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay. All right. So then
Let me try to find my mute button. Okay.
No, but we don't need you muted now because the floor is open.
Okay, great. Sorry, Nihilist. I didn't mean to have noise in your intro, but since you kind of gave a lot of points, and so we can be clear, I would love to go one by one. That way, we don't get lost in, me try to refute every one of your points. Now, I am aware that there are positive and negative eugenics, and I'm sure everyone and anyone would be against negative eugenics, like forced castration or forced sterilization, etc. So it seems that you're proposing, gradual positive eugenics, but I know I've seen you discuss this in Discord some in text chat, and you discuss really about that it should happen in the socialist society first, because in the capitalist system, you realize that designer babies, the rich would get that advantage, right? So go ahead and please make your first point one by one, and then I'll kind of cross-examine.
Is he glitching for anybody else?
Yeah, you're glitching out a little bit.
That was kind of glitchy. You're off to a really bad start to you.
Dang it. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going right into like the details of how I would want the policy implemented, I would think we would need at least a social democratic or liberal socialist system in order to actually facilitate eugenics without having it fall into that alt-right shithole. Because, well, if you live under capitalism, for example, yes, you would have all the rich people having designer babies and all the poor people would just be having regular children, and you'd get some sort of like social stratification. And eventually it could reach the point where designer babies are literally superior to people who are in the lower social classes. And then at that point, like you could almost guarantee that we'd like fall into fascism or something like that. So you'd probably need some way to ensure, if you were selecting for positive characteristics like intelligence and athletic ability or something like that, you would probably need to have some sort of program to ensure equity in some way. For example, like if black people tend to have lower IQs due to socioeconomic reasons, we can't simply say that we'll adjust for that we'll select for IQ, because, well, it could provide the effect of selecting against black people for reasons that are not biological. So you need to have some sort of awareness of equality and socioeconomic circumstances before you can before you can implement a eugenic policy with good conscience.
Okay, good. So we pretty much agree on that, and like even to me, even trying to begin a widespread eugenics, especially like one that was public, I'm okay with, maybe in some science, and even that I have ethical arguments against, but I want to just stick on eugenics and not like get stuck in the weeds on tangential topics. So what do you know of epigenetics?
Epigenetics,
Yeah.
I think, isn't epigenetics like, it's sort of how genetics interacts with the environment. For example, I believe some things like generational trauma can have epigenetic effects, or even homosexuality might be in some way genetically predisposed, but the activation of certain genes might be due to the environment. That's basically like my understanding of it.
Yeah, pretty good description. So to me, what that means is our environment can affect our genes. Right? So our genes, like epigenetics, has kind of showed that there's a flaw in Darwinism, in that like mutations, they weren't just random mutations that happen to be lucky to fit our environment. It's that our environment, we're learning in eugenics. I mean, epigenetics is very new. It's only about like 10 years old. They have discovered that it's actually our environment affects our genes in certain ways, because it affects which genes of ours get expressed. So we have realized that they call it the grandmother effect. That, like you said, a trauma that has happened to a certain generation. For example, if they've done experiments on grandmothers who were starving during pregnancy, and then their children and their grandchildren were more ill, compared to average. So, and then they've even done this test that fear can be passed on through genes, through epigenetics, tested mice and shocked them. They smelled cherry blossoms, another interesting experiment. And the children and the grandchildren of those mice also had that aversion to cherry blossoms. So I think like we're putting the cart before the horse. Like, I think we need to improve material situations, like to improve genes, rather than like try to find this quick shortcut answer, if that makes any sense.
Well, the problem is I don't see how these two necessarily conflict. I mean, epigenetics is a branch of the study of genetics. So if, for example, if we were doing a eugenic program or something like that, we presumably study the effects of epigenetics and how that could be used to inform the way we craft our genes intentionally, rather than just as an accidental result of the environment. I don't see how this is contradictory.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily say it was contradictory. So, like, I just want to have a discussion about epigenetics and what are the ethical ramifications, and how far I personally would be willing to go. Now, because we've studied epigenetics, I agree with you. We can use it for eugenics, because they have discovered that there's these things called histones that wrap around certain proteins that cause those proteins to be released, and we can, through epigenetics, discover that we can like tighten these histones. So let's say you have a a protein that gets expressed that could be called the cancer gene. Well, we can through epigenetics have that gene be less likely to be expressed. But if that person is in an environment that causes the epigenetics of that gene to be expressed anyway, it's kind of useless, right? Does that make sense?
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, my conception of eugenics is very broad, so I would include things like transhumanism or like the modification of already existing human bodies for positive purposes, or after birth, like you go in and use like CRISPR or whatever to modify the genetics of something. I think that can all like fall under like a broad category of what you might consider eugenics.
Understood. Good, good. And I think, it's important that people like understand the difference between negative and positive eugenics, because there is quite a difference. Now, as far as trying to choose for intelligence and or physical prowess, etc., who would you have making those decisions in your, policies?
Um, I don't think I've even gotten that far. Like, primarily, I am focused on the prevention of serious genetic diseases, but presumably I mean, I don't know if there's any other way to do it besides having the government like create a commission to decide some standards that, that select for people with supposedly for what we perceive as positive traits. Yeah. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I can't really go into more detail.
See, as an anarchist, that sounds very dangerous to me. The bureaucracy, like the bureaucracy is the problem, right? I really believe that. And, that's why I'm an anarchist, not a socialist. I mean, they have some places where they mix. But like, if you read Bakunin, he warned Marx about the red bureaucracy, and he warned about he warned about Stalin before Stalin became. So like that already, to me, I would have serious disagreements with. It's subjective, right? So I would prefer to, make it to where our nutrition is top notch for everyone, in our society. Make sure that everyone has top notch health care, because epigenetics can affect genetics. So really, like, improving the material conditions of people and the environment is the best way that we can, enhance nature, not, try to think we're better than nature, if that makes sense.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think it would be quite hypocritical for us to focus on increasing the genetic quality of all humans without first addressing all the environmental things. Like, what good would it do to increase the baseline genetic intelligence of a person if we're not going to provide a good education system and we're not going to provide like good nutrition programs or things like that, or like universal health care. Like, it would be quite hypocritical to try to improve the gene pool of somebody if we weren't already trying to maximize what we can get out of the genes we already have. And with regard to like the government controlling things, I mean, it's always a problem when the government has the authority to decide for other people, but you could also say that about basically anything. I mean, that's why I go back to my example of incest. I mean, I think most of us agree that incest is bad, and that most of us would probably be okay with incest being staying illegal under the government. Would you disagree with that?
See, that's it. An anarchist. I would prefer like society, not necessarily top down, bottom up, right? That's the difference. I think the difference between socialists and anarchists. Like socialists want to, take over the government and control, make people make more economic equality from top down, and I think that's power corrupts. So I want like a bottom up. So I would prefer society decide. Society has decided that, yeah, sleeping with your relatives is bad. So like we don't necessarily need a law to tell us that. I mean, yeah, some people need a law maybe. So I'm not against the law, but I would rather that law come bottom up.
Well, sure. I mean, it, I think it would be nice if we didn't have any government. I mean, if we were to achieve communism, get like a stateless society, then we'd have to find unique solutions to problems that we currently solve with government. But I think in practical purposes, I don't think it's necessarily any more wrong than any other policy that we currently do today, that ensures the health of the population.
Sure. Positive eugenics, especially in the way I described, in which we're trying to, make sure each child has, adequate neonatal care and adequate nutrition, and that they have adequate nutrition from birth. They've already shown that like even just like exposure to lead can change IQ significantly, right? So like poor people who have had older housing that was exposed to more lead would have had lower IQs, right? And then 3 generations later, they also would have had lower IQs, right? So like, I think it's more important to like find the reasons why people are not, reaching their adequate genetic peak and trying to solve those problems rather than trying to play God.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm okay with science, right? And I don't disagree with most of your positive eugenics. I think we both agree that it's kind of down the road. There's a lot of things that have to happen before. So yeah, I think in the future, and science it improves. Like I'm not against positive eugenics in as little as possible, in my personal opinion. And honestly, I think that if we just improve everyone's environment, they won't be necessary. Is my dream, I guess. But let's go into your anti-natalism a little bit too, because I want to go into some of your arguments about bringing a child into the world, etc. So if you could go into that now, if you don't mind a little.
Okay,
Unless you
sure.
want to add something to wrap up.
Well, I mean, I was about to head in that sort of direction as well. So, I do have sympathies with anarchist-leaning individuals. I do think that we should have a world free of coercion if that's in any way possible. And I think one of the main arguments for eugenics is that, well, you may not like that the government is controlling who can have children, but it's not quite free of coercion for the child when a parent decides when not to have children. I don't think reproduction is a human right. Uh, I I think I think all human rights have to do with self-determination, right? Your freedom to speak, your freedom to move, and express yourself. But then we have reproduction, which is the freedom to make somebody else exist and put them into this world of ours where it's full of coercion. And yeah, it doesn't seem anything like what we usually think of as human rights.
Mm, interesting arguments. So rights are a social construct, right? They're either agreed on by a legal document or social ideals, or some people say they're given by the creator. So that's the rights that we talk about as Americans, because I'm super USA.
You're really glitchy.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I think my mic's messed up, so I'll get a new mic for next time, and I apologize. I'll be better next time. But I'm just saying, like, the 3 main rights that I feel like that were in the Declaration of Independence are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to me, like, life is, right to new life. Liberty is the freedom.
So is the right to life? I mean, I don't think I think the right to life usually applies to oneself. I mean, if you have I don't think people should have the right to determine the status of whether someone else is alive. Like obviously murder is wrong, but then yeah, I don't see how the right to life, especially when it was written in the Constitution or no, the Declaration of Independence, I don't think they had reproduction in mind.
Okay, so we disagree on that point. I also think liberty describes, freedom. Liberty also is another right that I think that gives you the right to bear children.
Well, I'm not so sure about that because it's I mean, liberty in it implies a freedom from coercion, but I can't really think of many situations in which giving birth to a child would not be coercive to the child. Obviously, the child, before they exist, they have no ability to consent to being born, and then once it's outside of the womb, you have to parent it and basically tell it what to do for like 18 years. I think if you were truly a libertarian, then you would probably want to violate consent as little as possible, which would imply that unless you had a good reason to, you would not have children.
Yeah, we can get to the reasons, but also pursuit of happiness, I believe, is also children can make people very happy, and I think it is their liberty to pursue um, the creation of life. And I believe the pursuit of happiness also is something that could be an argument for bearing children.
Yeah, well, so everything that you're listing out, that life or liberty or happiness, it seems to be all within the perspective of the parent. Yes, the parent has the right to give life to other people. The parent has the liberty to force life upon other people, and then the parent has the liberty to make themselves happy by forcing life onto other people. But clearly, these interactions, when they involve someone else, there are limits. For example, I cannot make myself happy by punching someone in the face. I don't think it's right for me to make myself happy by forcing someone into a life full of coercion and full of pain.
Okay. My opinion, and I don't mean to get personal, I think that's kind of a narcissistic way of viewing the purpose of humanity. I personally, as a Christian anarchist or an anarcho-pacifist, think the purpose of life is to realize you're part of the ecosystem and try to improve that ecosystem. Like I think we're in a garden, we're the gardeners. And I don't think the purpose of life is to be happy. I don't think Catholics say a lot, God doesn't want you to be happy, he wants you to be strong. So what do you, that's my argument against your idea that life is innately worth living, because life should be, uh, life shouldn't be a struggle. Like I think if we look at nature, life is a struggle. Like a chicken has to struggle to get out of the egg, right? A baby chick. A plant has to struggle to break the dirt, right? I mean, that's part of struggle is a part of life. And I think like to assume that someone won't want the opportunity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of their own happiness um, is also taking away their chance for some rights.
Well, sure. Well, let's start with the struggling. I mean, if you say that life inherently has struggle, I mean, I don't see how this would apply specifically to reproduction. I mean, either you apply it to the rest of life, in which I don't see why you would want to have children. Why would you even would want to have children with a good upbringing if they can struggle more to succeed in life, or that you can violate people who already exist because just to create more suffering or struggling. I don't see why struggling can be used in this one instance without excusing basically any of the actions that we take in the rest of our lives with interaction with already existing people.
I'm not buying. See, I'm not saying struggle is the purpose of life. I think the purpose of life is to improve. The golden rule: treat everybody like you want to be treated. Or actually, I want to go take it one step further: leave everything better than you found it. And that's what I think the purpose of life is. So, to think that the purpose of life is to not struggle, which is kind of what I thought your argument was. I disagree with you. You can continue to have that view, but I'm just saying that this is my retort. Is I believe that there's more to, like I don't believe in I think narcissism is a bad thing, and I believe in service to self, service to others over service to self. So that's just my argument for the kind of the anti-natalist esque
Yeah.
arguments you're kind of making.
Yeah, so what do you mean when you say that you want to improve an ecosystem or you want to improve others? You must have some standard by which you judge what is an improvement and what is not.
Yes, yes, that's informed by my my lifelong studies of nutrition, improving people's mood. I'm a musician, that's my primary career, but also, studying politics, studying philosophy, passing this knowledge on, being a teacher, I was a music teacher and decided I didn't like teaching music. So I kind of went into other things, um, and that I just think that our purpose should be to improve. And I think we get a little caught up in not wanting to suffer. And I think iron sharpens iron, meaning, the struggle is what makes us stronger, and that strength can help us, help those around us.
Well, what is the purpose of strength, right? Because you mentioned nutrition and improving people's mood and politics. Presumably, nutrition. Presumably, you would want people to have strong nutrition so that they have healthy bodies, so they don't suffer as much. Presumably, you want politics to create an anarchist society in which there's less coercion and through that less struggle. I don't see how I don't see how you could define things in terms of improvement without valuing the reduction of struggle to some extent.
I didn't say I didn't value the reduction of struggle. I do not think that it should be the primary concern of life is to avoid struggle. I want to struggle so that others do not have to, but also learn the skills to be able to struggle and achieve things as well. I want to teach people to fish, right? So I got to learn to fish first, right?
Okay, well, what's the point of fishing though?
Nutrition,
Just to do it? Yeah, to
sustenance.
nutrition and sustenance so that people don't have to struggle as much. I don't see how you
Yes,
can have an ethical system without eventually collapsing back into utilitarianism or some form of it.
I'm not completely opposed to utilitarianism. Honestly, as far as ethics go, because of my Christian anarchism, I probably more align with Kant, meaning that I don't think any human should be treated as a means, that every human should be treated as their own end. And then my ethics are also that if I did something and everybody else did something, would society be better or worse? So why I think your anti-natalism is unethical, because if I never have children and then no one else ever has children, then society can collapse.
Well, I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with human extinction. I mean, if you look at all the suffering humans cause to the rest of the world, it seems to and to themselves, it seems to kind of balance out. For example, each person, this I took it from like some website that was based on Australian people, but each Australian kills 100,000 animals per year just to have food and food production and its byproducts. Like we cause a huge amount of suffering on to the rest of the world. I think there's actually a pretty good argument that human extinction wouldn't be such a bad thing.
And honestly, like I think if humans become extinct, it probably is deserved. But that's why I want to try to build a better world. I want to try to, get people to study ecology and understand that, quantum physics, like we're all you and I or me or one is we and are all together, like John Lennon said. And like I don't think that it's a bad thing to want to improve things around you. That's all.
Okay, so I have a question about your ethical system. You mentioned that you liked Kant and that you wanted to take actions for the sake of other people and have other people as the means in themselves, right? So do you do you think you have a duty not to create unhappy children?
Do I have a duty to not? I have a duty to create children with that are able to take care of themselves, that have the values to want to improve the world as well.
Do you think you have a duty to create happy children in general? Like, if someone doesn't want to have children, do you think they have a duty to have children anyway?
Happiness is subjective, and I personally would hope that my children would have the value of improving the world, give them happiness. So I would like to teach them to how to improve the world, and that would hopefully give them fulfillment and happiness.
Yeah, because I don't really see the line here from wanting to improve the world and then rejecting the idea that we should select children who are more likely to have better lives and be more capable of improving the world. Uh, and also, of course, if you want to consider third parties here, you might consider, for example, the immigrants who want to come into the country or the orphans who need parents and don't have them because all the available parents are reproducing and having their own children instead. And of course, I made I made the reference to veganism. Why, if you're a vegan, you might want to consider either anti-natalism or some eugenic policy where there's a higher burden of proof that you must fulfill before you justify having children.
I'm not a vegan. In fact, I think vegans follow a lot of propaganda. So, but I still don't understand, like why. I mean, like I think people with your ethics can exist in the world, and people with ethics can exist in my world. Like I think there is some value to human life, and I think that humans, if we learn to live in the ecology around us, and take all of our shared knowledge from all cultures, because some cultures are more ecologically aware, that maybe some people that love technology, think they can't learn from them. But see, I think it's important to learn from every culture, and most cultures throughout the world, and most people. I mean, we'd have to do a poll as to whether most people regret being born, and I think more people would say they don't regret being born. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Well, I don't think that really matters. I mean, even if it was the case that, suicidal or depressed people don't exist, and that almost everybody does like does like the fact that they were born, that doesn't reduce the amount of coercion that was imposed upon them in their childbirth. For example, I I wouldn't I assume that most people would like it if I sucked their dick, but I wouldn't want to stick their dick in my mouth without asking them first, even if I thought they would like it. I think I'd like to have a little bit of consent before I do an action like that. But that's not possible when it comes to childbirth.
Mm, but I mean, I'm sure you've heard the many arguments about a consciousness, and theta brain waves and alpha brain waves, and how old we are when we start getting alpha brain waves, and like some would say that children under a certain age are not capable of any decision as to whether they you know and like I said, they're minors, so their rights are limited as well. um but like I said, I think it's kind of narcissistic to not want to try to improve the mess we made.
Well, I don't. Okay, I'm trying to find a way that we can move on, because it seems like you just believe that having children and having more people is necessarily a good thing. If you believe that to your core, then I don't know how limiting. I don't know how I would be able to go about convincing you to limit certain births. Let's
Yeah,
see.
well, because I think it happens naturally. Like Malthus, he thought that because plants spread faster than, I mean, because animals spread faster than plant, that eventually the animals would run out of food, and that's why he thought life was a struggle. But he was wrong. It's mutual aid, right? Like, there's a balance. Nature finds a way to. It always does. So, like in industrialized nations, like birth rates go down. Like the replacement rate is a little over two, right? It's one for
Yeah.
you, one for your spouse, and then a little extra for people that don't have children, right? We're under the replacement rate in America. Most of the industrialized nations are under the replacement rate. A big reason for that is pollution. Pollution is causing the epigenetic changes, which are causing us to be less, have less, men are producing less sperm, their penises are shrinking, and we know it's because of the toxicity of plastics, right?
No, it's
And
because of the leftists. They're making the children, and they're making people have smaller dicks. Confirmed.
so yeah, we agree on a lot of stuff, man. And yeah, you're right. There's some things in our ethics that we will not convince each other of, and I don't think it's necessary to convince each other. I think it's good to just come to a place of mutual understanding, and that's kind of what I wish. Like even people on the far right, whatever your political ideology, like I wish we'd engage directly with people's conversations, agree to disagree when we disagree without like having to have a conniption fit. And like, just like me personally, I want to wake up the working class to remember that labor has historically always been left in American politics. But some reason, a lot of people that proudly call themselves right, They like attached themselves to that name. And I suggest those people look up a psychology that was done after World War II on the authoritarian right-wing mindset and just see if that stuff fits you. Like, I want people to stop being followers and being leaders, because too many of our young people are either becoming tankies or calling for monarchy or wanting a dictator. Like, as an American, and in anarchism, and I'll explain one day if I get into the debate how anarchism and American democracy are actually very similar. But that's just it, man. I believe in freedom. I believe in doing better. I believe in cleaning up your mess. And rather than saying, oh, we fucked up, let's just die, my view is let's clean up our mess. And maybe we got to teach our children to be better than us.
But you wouldn't you wouldn't want a program to make our children better than us. You would just want it to be taught only. I mean, can I at least get you on like the point of for example, universal genetic screening for prospective parents? Like, do you have any argument against that?
Yeah, I think that actually epigenetics has showed us that two parents that really care for their child tend to talk to them more, give them more affection, and that helps them produce better outcomes. And I think that people that may be screened, that may be missing, like I said, you're playing God a little bit. Like in my world, like both parents would love the hell out of their children, and they would get the first year off paid leave, men and women, and we would concentrate on making sure our next generation was better off than us.
Well, I agree with you that being a parent should be paid, but why would you pay people if you knew that they would not be good parents? I mean, usually you want people to be qualified for jobs, and I'd argue that being a parent is one of the most important jobs that society actually has. So why would you actually allow just anybody to go ahead, get pregnant when they're like 15 years old, and then just get paid for that if you know that they won't do a responsible job or that they are just unable to have children who are healthy?
Do you think a bad parent today will always be a bad parent tomorrow?
Well, I can only go off of what we have, like the information that we have. I don't think it's right for a 15-year-old to have children. It's just I assume it's possible. It's very possible that a 15-year-old could go on to be a very good mother, for example. But I wouldn't bet. I wouldn't make that bet. And I think it would be better if we were to delay those sorts of pregnancies until we have more responsible people. I mean,
I
yeah.
I think our society already kind of pushes for that, right? So we do try to get people to, practice safe sex, be educated, be informed, pick up a skill. Like we do in our society already try to do that. I don't think we need
But is it
the
enough?
government.
Because I mean, even though we do have sex ed, and I think that's very good, we still have a bunch of people who think they know shit and that still think, oh, well, I know everything. I took everything. I'm just going to have a child when I'm 16 anyway. Is this so? Even if we design an environment where people are discouraged to do something, if it happens, are you just okay with it?
Yes, because I think we should improve the material conditions of as many people as possible. And I think that's more important than trying to take someone's liberty away.
Okay. I think it's a very strange form of liberty that you're talking about, where you only consider the liberty of the parent and you don't consider any third parties or the child that
No,
may be involved.
I am considering that I want a society where the society itself will want to help that bad parent become better, quote, bad parent become better. Because, children don't come with an instruction manual, and no one is born a good parent. Newsflash. And every parent's going to make mistakes, right? But yeah, I want to educate. I want to make sure people have proper nutrition, people have proper health care. Because, if the better the society is around me, the better my life as well, right?
Well, yeah, I like having healthcare. I think healthcare should be nationalized and universal. But based on everything I know, prevention is the best form of healthcare. I don't see why you could make an argument that preventing parents from from passing on a genetic disease like Tay-Sachs disease that would cause death within the first few months. I don't see how that could be detrimental to the society. It seems like it would just create happier people overall who are in a world with less unnecessary tragedy. And you could have more resources to use on people who are already healthy. You can improve the lives of more people if you spend less medical costs on people you knew would have those diseases before you even created them.
Yeah, good idea, right? Good ideal. That's a very noble way to try to look at it. You don't want people to come in that struggle. But the perfect example, Helen Keller, one of my heroes, right? And I don't know if you know about her politics, but she was a wobbly. She was a International Workers of the World. Me, for example, I had the gene for diabetes. I went blind from it at age 30. So in your idea, I shouldn't exist. But sometimes iron sharpens iron. Do you know what I mean by that?
I mean, I'm not doubting that people with huge disabilities could become successful in their own way, but also I don't think that's the same as saying like people who are blind necessarily have it just as good as people who are not blind, you know? I think it would just be better overall if we, instead of blind people, had children who are not blind, or if instead of spending extra money treating people who are blind, and figuring out all that, that we spend that same amount of money helping people who already exist and who are already in need.
Somebody in the chat wanted to know from Nihilist do you know about GWAS studies on IQ, G factor, proving that there are genetic clusters coded for intelligence, especially on race differences? It's from Ubersoy.
Yikes, race differences.
I
don't trust
the title.
I do not trust anything that connects G to race. As far as I know, race and intelligence are not connected. And even if it was the case that like black people are just naturally 10 IQ points lower, I wouldn't care, because there are still black people with 130 IQ, and there are still white people with like 60 IQ, like presumably all the Nazis in chat or whatever, right? If you really cared about IQ, you would just select for IQ directly. And if black people are really that dumb, they'll just get selected out. But I don't feel like the need for a race-based policy like that,
And can I answer that as well?
Yeah.
These people are on old science. They have not studied epigenetics, because epigenetics prove that our environment can change our genes. Therefore, like if white people were put in an environment that had a lot of lead, in 3 generations, their IQ would be less than black people were put in an ideal environment for their health. Now black people have darker skin. They have more trouble getting vitamin D from the sun. They have different dietary needs because of where their epigenetics caused their diet, right? So, like, for example, most people don't realize people got white skin not because of they were in the North Pole and less exposure to the sun. They got it because they were eating cereals, grains, because they didn't have wildlife, or they were hilly, rocky, mountainy terrain, right? So they started growing grain, which my indigenous ancestors, we grew beans, corn, and squash, right? So there's indigenous people that can live off of just beans, corn, and squash and be perfectly healthy, but they eat wheat. And like me, I eat processed, wheat. My blood sugar goes to 200. I became keto and eat like my ancestors ate, and now I'm completely off all of my diabetes medicine. Like, me going blind is what caused me to learn all this information, this knowledge, so I can pass it on to hopefully make the world a better place, so other people don't have to go blind.
All right. I think we've kind of lost where we were before. Is it okay if I just run you through a few potential scenarios just to see like where you would stand on these?
Sure.
All right. So, do you think it's moral for a mother to drink alcohol while pregnant?
I think it is immoral, and I think it is the job of society to teach people to not be immoral. Family, um, neighbors, and I don't think a government should have to do it. Like, I think naturally as humans, we evolved through mutual aid, and I think mutual aid could be our answer.
Okay. I mean, it seems like you just have an aversion to the government basically mandating anything or illegalizing anything then.
I think the government should only mainly make sure the corporations don't get too much economic power. And my ideal system is like very similar to like what Jefferson and Thomas Paine wrote about. Like, I think that, you know, as long like the government should give us our national rights, right? The federal government should give us our national rights, and you know, no state can break those national rights, like, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom, you know, to own weapons, freedom to, you know, against illegal search and seizure, etc. And then I think they should limit the laws they pass on citizens, and those should be handled by more local municipalities. And the federal government should just do those national, you know, those national rights or those, you know, federal rights, and keep the corporations that trade between states in check. In my
Oh,
more ideal system.
I mean, it just seems like if you're going down that sort of slippery slope path where like even something that we all agree is bad should not be not be illegalized by the government. It seems like, in fact, it could be even a more radical solution or a radical set of policy positions than what I've advocated for here today. I mean, what level of
You
government?
really, you really want to compare slippery slope and you're arguing eugenics.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've already addressed the slippery slope, right? I've said that
Yeah,
you should
yeah.
not attempt
So,
a eugenic
well, yeah,
policy
but
in
I mean,
anything other than a
yeah.
left wing situation.
What all I'm saying is, yeah, you address the slippery slope argument, and now, yeah. So why can't I make a slippery slope argument? What
Well,
slippery
I mean, my
slope are you
argument
against with my ideology?
Well, my argument was that my argument is that the slippery slope is a false. It's an illusion, right? You don't need to. You don't need. You can do eugenics without necessarily falling into like Nazi territory, and that you can use some amount of government regulation without having like an authoritarian state. I think I'm just generally anti slippery slope arguments.
Yeah, I did. I never made a slippery slope argument with you. I made an ethical argument. I understand you get that a lot, and I tried to explain the difference between positive and negative eugenics, explaining where I would be. You like, I love science. I'm down with like us learning more about epigenetics. And like I said, I think in my ideal world, we would learn so much about epigenetics that your proposed eugenic solutions would be moot.
Okay, so at what like level of organization do you think it would be okay for us to say something is not allowed? Like, do you think it should be at like the local yeah, the local community level, or in like the family unit level, or like how high do you think things can go before you can say, but before they can no longer make judgments about what people do in their personal lives?
I want people to have the autonomy to be able to make as many decisions as possible, and would hope that they would consider those around them and their community and their ecology and their society in those decisions. I mean, could you be a little more specific?
I mean, I presume that you would want murder to be illegal, right?
Murder is illegal. Has that significantly stopped murders, or could maybe doing something about people's material conditions actually reduce murders more than a law? Is my
I mean, I think both of them help, right? Do you think a land in which
I'm
murder
not
is
against
legal?
I'm not against laws, but I think there are more effective ways. And yes, I do agree that some people are very authoritarian minded and need a law. I agree completely, 100%. And I'm not against laws, but I think there are more effective ways for people that are of higher ethics to make these arguments than just having a piece of paper.
I mean, I think it's a false dichotomy. I think it can be both illegal to kill and also that we can have a society which discourages killing generally. I think
That's
we
exactly
have
what I
that.
just said.
I don't see
That's
why
exactly what
having. I,
I just said it wasn't a dichotomy. I just said we can have laws
well,
and societal things.
well, you're
I don't,
saying that
you're,
like improving the environment to influence epigenetics will make will make eugenics a moot point, which I just disagree with. First of all, I don't think the influence of epigenetic factors is nearly as high as you think it is. Um, as far as I know, epigenetics don't actually go too far beyond the current person. They tend to have a relatively small effect compared to directly changing the genes in a person. I think
epigenetics are actually can explain the differences that humans have with different diets. It can explain why white people got white skin. It can explain why people are lactose intolerant. It can explain why some people, like the Eskimos and their descendants, like can live off of just fat. Do you understand? That's all
well,
because of epigenetics.
I mean, I tend to associate that with natural selection. I mean, like lactose intolerance. Presumably, well, I'm pretty sure we all and originally were lactose intolerant, and presumably at some point one of the genes that turns off the production of lactase just stopped working, and then at that point, people who could continue to drink milk long after everybody else could no longer do it just survived.
Epigenetics is the mechanism that turned off that gene. Do you understand? You just made my argument for me.
I don't. Okay, I would have to go into further study to see the effect, to see how much epigenetics affects our genes.
I
I don't.
definitely suggest you look into epigenetics, especially if you're, pro eugenics, to fully understand your arguments. I think, and this is just personal in the advice, because we're both leftists and we both love, people more than profits. So I think you should look into epigenetics because the science, just in the last 5 years, has made significant. And honestly, like the nature versus nurture argument is over in the last 5 years. And yeah, study it. Let's study it together. Because I'm not a genealogist. I'm a damn jazz musician, man. So yeah, help me learn this too.
Ubersoy wants to know for Tio, does blind Tio wanting to give autonomy to people extend in their decision in aborting people with lesser genetics?
I do not like abortion. I'm a Christian anarchist. I want to find effective ways of ending abortion. I think prohibiting abortion would just cause black markets and actually wouldn't lower the actual number of abortions. What has been proven to lower abortions in American history is adequate health care. So if you want to lower abortions, you lower poverty. That's,
And they have another question for you. So does blind Tio know that racial differences in light exposure contribute to a 0.3 difference in IQ? Also, epigenetics are based on genetics.
Yes, epigenetics are based on genetics. Epi means above genetics, right? So epigenetics is the study of the things that contribute to your genes, right? So those racial factors that could just be, some people get curly hair and some people don't. Some people have dark eyes and some people don't. Like, yeah, so what do those factors matter? Humans share 0.01 genes. There's not that much different. In fact, there's more differences between different groups of African diasporas because they were separated longer ago and never intermixed. And then the diaspora from Eastern Africa, like that started the migration into Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, modernly, is a separate diaspora, right? So those people would have more in common with a Caucasian or a Asian person than the diaspora of other Africans. Do you understand genetics?
So
Yeah, wait,
glitchy.
I'm reading the Wikipedia page on epigenetics right now, and it doesn't seem like it works the way you think it works. I mean, it says right here, epigenetics is the study of heritable phenotype changes that do not involve alterations in the DNA sequence. In
It's
yeah,
not
so
okay. Let me explain it. It's not the DNA sequence. It's
yes, the
which genes
expression.
of this
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
Epigenetics mostly involves changes that affect gene activity and expression, but the term can also be used to describe any heritable phenotypic change. But what I'm talking about is changing the genes themselves. I don't see how one of them could make the other a moot point because no matter how much you do epigenetics, you're still locked within the confines of what our current genes are able to do. Eugenics would change the genes themselves so that we could change our actual baseline potential. I don't see how you
Read,
could replace regular
read
eugenics with
Mary.
epigenetics.
Read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, please.
I mean, I think isn't that like a piece of literature? I don't think reading literature, which tends to tap into our emotions, I don't think that's a good
I
argument
think
for
better
the
than reading a
empirical basis.
Wikipedia article. I think it's better than a Wikipedia article. Honestly, you can find truth in fiction. You really can.
Well, I'm trying to find
Ethical
truth in an
truth,
encyclopedia.
ethical
I think
truth, ethical truth, and moral truth you can find in fiction. And I also told you to look up epigenetics more and let's learn about it together. So yeah, let's learn about it. Don't just read a Wikipedia article in this debate and expect that you will automatically, magically know everything about epigenetics. You know, I've been studying it. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I've been looking into it for several years. It has some alignment with quantum physics, and non-Euclidean geometry was actually the thing I really loved to study. But recently for this debate, I really got hard into it, man. There's so much out there that I think would benefit your eugenics argument if you would start looking into this all.
I think it's just ineffective to hope that changing the environment for the better will decrease things like Tay-Sachs disease or like Harlequin babies. You guys should all search that up too. It's disgusting. Like Harlequin babies, they're caused by a genetic disorder. Like we know exactly how to prevent it, and you won't even endorse the idea that we should not have people with serious genetic diseases reproduce. I mean, I'm sure eventually, based on what you're saying, that we can somehow get rid of all genetic diseases by just changing the environment. But why don't we just do it right now and save so many lives and
You're
save so much suffering?
misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding a lot of my arguments, and you're kind of putting words in my mouth. So I just assume you don't understand. Like I said, iron sharpens iron. I believe that suffering can lead to greatness. I believe that nature finds a way.
Yeah,
I
I don't
believe
see how the
that
suffering of
I believe that you're trying to find a band-aid solution rather than putting in the work is what I think you're doing.
well, I don't think suffering iron sharpening iron is a good reason to have Harlequin babies that'll die in a matter of
I
days.
already
Like
said if epigenetics can teach us which histones we can use to block that expression of the gene that causes that disease, I'm for it.
okay, so you would go in and actually like change it manually then?
That's why
Is
you
that
should study about epigenetics and learn how they have learned how to use histones. Histones are like little cords that wrap around the I forget what they're called, but they're the ones that produce the
So
protein.
glitchy.
And the histone, sorry, so the histones are yeah, just look into histones, and there's another one too, I forget, other than histones. But yeah, help us. Like we should research this together because I think you and I could make arguments for minimal positive eugenics together.
Well, Kimbo DDD for Nihilist says, should people that carry the sickle cell gene I'm guessing, be taken out of the gene pool?
I think what he's referring to is sickle cell anemia, which is a genetic disease that causes, well, sickle cell anemia. But another effect of that is if you're a carrier of the sickle cell disorder gene, then you will be more resistant to diseases like malaria and stuff like that. So eliminating the sickle cell gene could have unintended consequences down the line. For example,
Exactly.
in many African populations, you could increase the risk of malaria and cause infinitely more suffering that way. And of course, that doesn't really refute like the conceptual point that I
No,
want
do you
to
hear the
improve our
cognitive
gene pool.
dissonance? Do you hear the cognitive dissonance?
Where's the cognitive dissonance?
If we get rid of sickle cell, we
I'm not
might
saying we
not.
should.
Dude,
I'm saying we might want to
dude, you
get rid of
totally
it.
contradict yourself just
Wait,
now.
no. Wait,
So
what?
it was epigenetics that caused people that got a lot of malaria to start having sickle cell anemia. Did you?
No, I think it
think
was
about
natural
it, bro.
selection. I think it was natural selection that did that, not epigenetics.
And you're wrong. You're wrong. Your science is 10 years
I'm
behind
sorry,
plus.
I'm sorry, but like even just reading the baseline, like Wikipedia, like the top paragraph of Wikipedia.
Oh, I read the
provides a
wiki
different
article. I know
definition.
everything about it.
Provides
I'm
a
a
different-
Zoomer. I know everything because I read a Wikipedia article.
No,
Good
seriously,
God,
like
man.
I don't know what.
Seriously, man, I'm so smart. I'm a Zoomer. I read a Wikipedia article. I know everything about epigenetics, man.
I don't know what you think about like Wikipedia. Like I don't know who you listen to that thinks like Wikipedia is just like like just all full of lies. But all I'm saying is I'm reading a relatively reliable source that tells me that epigenetics doesn't even function in the same way that you say it does. Like
no, you're wrong. You just misunderstood the way I explained it because I was talking about the histones and gene expression. Watch the VOD tomorrow. Watch the VOD tomorrow, dude. Watch the VOD tomorrow. Quit thinking you're smarter than everybody.
You explicitly said that lactose tolerance was caused by environmental factors changing the genes themselves, and then I just looked at it and said no, it's not. Lactose intolerance was caused by natural selection. The gene itself changed, not some expression of the same gene.
Epigenetics is the mechanism that nature uses to select which genes gets expressed.
No, natural selection. Okay. Oh my God. Oh man.
Well, we can go to some more of these questions from the John.
Yeah, can we go to guys?
For both, should there be a government program to enforce what genes we allow in children that are born? Should parents be allowed to select for genes, or do we ban gene tech?
If you'll let me go first,
Sure.
I think there should be a straight ban list of certain genes. For example, like the gene that causes Harlequin baby syndrome, that is disgusting. I don't see what positive effect that could have, but unless we find one, I think it would be pretty justifiable to prevent people with matching sets of those genes to reproduce together. I think it might be okay for if you are a carrier to reproduce with someone who's not a carrier. If it's a recessive gene, if it's a dominant gene, you have to get rid of it altogether. Like I think Huntington's disease, it's a dominant gene that just causes death by the time you're 40. Like that's like okay, we got to get rid of that. And other ones like for example, if you'll have like a lot of freckles on your skin, I don't know, that maybe the parent should select for that, you know.
Okay. No freckles.
I believe in freedom. I don't believe in any figure telling people what to do, like as minimal as possible. The government which governs least governs best. I do believe in science and research as long as it doesn't, lead to any negative outcomes, and those we should be, aware of what these people are studying in society to make sure they're being ethical, and and that's it. That's my answer.
Okay. From the Southern Daily News, ask both of them, should we use eugenics to eliminate genes that lead to in-group bias?
Absolutely, we should. I mean, if we have too much, I don't see the problem with a little bit of it, but yeah, we should probably reduce it because we have way too many racists and nationalists around here.
Oh God! All right.
If we think we can isolate that gene, I still
racist gene.
I don't think we can isolate it.
I still think it's trying to play God, and I think we wouldn't see unintended consequences.
I think ideally we would, but you can't, like, we don't know the genes that are involved with that. So we might do it by proxy by selecting for certain personalities. Of course, that would be very subjective. I wouldn't endorse a program to do it right away. I'd start with, of course, eliminating serious genetic diseases before going on to more specific categories that could be a little bit more controversial.
Okay, so from Uber Soy, A question for Blind Tio. Will epigenetics help genetically unintelligent people to become more intelligent, given we have not found any genes for stupidity, just intelligence?
Yes, epigenetics, like changes even throughout your life can change how your genes are expressed. And like, I'm not a genealogist, that's why I don't try to argue, eugenics ain't my jam, right? Like in epigenetics, like, man, I think it's the answer to, honestly, it's the answer to a lot of these race realists. And I think it's old technology that they're like, and honestly, no offense, nihilist, I think you're on the old technology, the old genetics, and epigenetics is like the new shit, right? So let's get up to date together and understand, the nature versus nurture argument has been answered. I'm telling you guys, and look into it. Help me.
Okay, the Tanky box. I'm guessing that. Do they realize that eugenics would lead to the selection of traits that are conducive to individual level reproduction, but are harmful to the groups like extroversion and those?
What? I think the
agree.
opposite. I think the opposite might be the case. I mean, if you're doing regular natural selection, then yeah, you would probably have a weighting towards individual level reproduction. But for example, if it was like something that was harmful to the group, like or good for the group, for example, gay people. Scientists think that gay people provide like a social are like the social glue because they don't have children, but they're like very social. That they provide some sort of function that allows the entire tribe. Back in the days when we were still evolving, we're still evolving now, but the point is, like, back in the day, like, you would have a gay person in the tribe who acts like the glue between everybody, who allows the entire tribe and people with similar genetics as the gay person to reproduce the gay genes, so to speak, later on, which is why we have so many people that are gay. But nowadays, for example, people are moving around. We're no longer stuck in tribes where a lot of people are genetically similar to each other. So the kin selection effect, where you benefit the chances of your kin to reproduce, is reduced compared to what it was when we were all in like tribes of genetically similar people, which means gay people are going to be eventually bred out of existence by the fact that we're no longer selecting for people who have the gay gene as much anymore. So actually, unless we make a concerted effort to increase the amount of gay people reproducing, it is possible that generations down the line, that due to internationalism, gay people could actually be selected out of existence.
Hold on, wait, because I think I wasn't listening to the first part. Did you say that there is a gay gene?
So to speak, it's not actually a gay gene, but there's genes associated with it, I believe. So it's genetic to some extent, right? And so the tribes where there were more people who were gay were able to survive and pass on the genes of people, pass on the genes that made some people gay, compared to tribes with no gay people, for example, which is why the gay gene is still around despite gay people themselves never reproducing. Do you understand?
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, unless we select for gay people, they will eventually disappear based on internationalism. So it would actually require eugenic efforts to create people who are beneficial not only to themselves but people to the broader whole.
Okay. So from Shamus Crawford.
Oh, can I answer? Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because he was asking, like, I don't know why it's off to gay, but he asked if, since we haven't found epigenetic, triggers for dumb and only intelligent, right? Like, would it, can we make dumb people more intelligent? Like, I think is what he was saying. It's like, to me, man, like we know what things can make that knob of intelligence get turned up, right? Like good food, no exposure to toxins, So let's start there, like, naturally first, before we start artificially trying to turn these knobs. Is all I'm saying, man.
Okay. All right. So from Shamus Crawford, should we kill all people that are going to die anyways, or just babies?
Well, all people are going to die anyway. So I mean, I think voluntary human extinction is a rational position, though I don't necessarily support it fully. But just babies? I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, if we're talking about abortion, then yeah, I support abortion, but not babies.
I think he's talking about euthanasia.
Okay.
I think he's talking about euthanasia. And
Oh yeah, euthanasia is okay. Yeah, we should legalize it.
That I'm still like, I think we should find treatments like mushrooms to get people to not and pain-free ways of still existing. Because what if like somebody that would have euthanized themselves, like the day after they euthanized themselves, they would have like, wow, I cured cancer or something. Yeah, I'm being hyperbolic, right? So yeah, like I don't know, man. I don't like playing God. I really don't.
Okay, so from Urbasoy. Question for a nihilist. Does he know? God, I think I need glasses, you guys. I cannot see. Okay. Question for a nihilist. Does he know that in non-Western countries and in Western, to a big degree, most homosexuals have children and are in heterosexual marriages?
Well, that could be the case, but possibly because in Western society, being gay is still looked down upon. So people who might naturally be gay, they might be deluded into joining straight relationships and reproducing that way. But if we become more socially progressive, such that gay people would be allowed to express themselves freely, they would be less likely to have children. So that's actually an argument in my position that gay people are being selected against in the modern world compared to how it was back then, which means we probably need a concerted eugenic effort to make sure that they stay within our population if we value the contributions that gay people give to society.
If we have an LGBT plus debate that I'm on, I have a lot of anthropological things I can say about it, but yeah, it's a whole different topic. So,
okay. So from Elronder, would you be against racial in-group bias, even if I could prove to you that this leads to the striving of the genes you like to select for over a race-blind society?
No, that's like saying that's like asking for a square circle. If you're racist, I doubt you'll ever be able to actually objectively look for, good genes. I think we tried that with the Nazis. It didn't work out so well.
I don't want a race blind society. In fact, like I think it's nothing wrong with saying that there's differences in our ethnicities and our phenotypes and our diasporas, whatever technology, words you want to use. Now, like for example, like people that are people with dark skin living up north during midnight sun, they need more vitamin D. They need to consume more vitamin D. So like there's nothing wrong with seeing the differences, and I mean, yeah, that may be why. Maybe it's dark skinned people in certain climates have lower IQ because they're not getting adequate direct sun, blue light. So who knows? I mean, let's study all this stuff.
Okay. Let's see here. From Stranger, why does homosexuality have did I do this one already? No. Have an extremely low heritability rate, and where's the evidence of a gay gene?
All right, so the reason why homosexuality has a very extremely low heritability rate is because, well, it's because if everybody's gay, then nobody's left to reproduce. So the gay people have to benefit the straight people enough so that the straight people reproduce more children than if the gay people had been straight themselves. So there naturally has to be a low heritability rate. And of course, the evidence of a gay gene, I don't have it on hand right now. You should look online for evidence concerning that. I'm pretty sure it is in some amount genetic. Actually, it has.
I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article you can read and magically know everything about it.
But
sorry, just giving you shit, bro. I'm just giving you shit, bro. I'm just giving you shit. Don't be so sensitive.
But yeah, being gay is epigenetic. Like for example, in fact, it seems to be the case that
I would agree with you there. So okay, now you're starting to make my arguments. But let's go on to the next questions.
So
but before that, can I just say? Yeah, so so being gay is actually in to some amount epigenetic in that apparently second-born children are more likely to be gay than the first one because the theory is that if you're a firstborn children, you have to carry on the genes and and reproduce and stuff like that. But if there's more leftover children after that, there's more room for more of them to be gay, because then, there's more people for the gay people to help later on. So that would be an example of true epigenetics.
All right, so from the John, for a nihilist, what would be your criteria for deciding what genes should be eliminated?
I haven't figured that out completely. I think if it's a serious genetic disease that doesn't give positive benefits the way sickle cell carriers might have, then it should be safe to axe. But for other stuff like unattractiveness and stuff like that, I'd be more careful. I think, which is why I want a gradualist approach that starts with the least objectionable cases before we decide what to do later on. I just want to destigmatize the idea of eugenics and bring it back into the mainstream as an idea that we should be seriously considering, because we should.
Okay. This looks like it's broken into two questions, or just two sections. All right, so from the Southern Daily News, ask them if they are familiar with the spiteful mutant hypothesis, which suggests that the lack of harsh Darwinian selection pressures lead to maladaptive beliefs. And wait, there's more. Hold on. Such as atheism or advocating voluntary extinction, and etc.
I don't know. It seems like you presuppose that atheism and the voluntary extinction movement are bad. So, I don't know. It seems like a feelings over facts argument.
Okay.
I agree.
So from Ubersoy, why should gays be kept in the population, assuming it is 100% heritable, which is not, given that they are maladaptive from? Did we do this one already? From a Darwinian perspective?
No, they just hear gay. They just hear gay and they go crazy. They just hear gay and they go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, baby, USA.
Okay.
Wait, how are they maladaptive? I just spent so much time explaining kin selection and how you don't need to reproduce yourself in order to help the people genetically close to you reproduce for you. I just explained that. It's not maladaptive.
Mm-hmm. All right. So from Tanky's Bot, psychopaths are overrepresented in professions like CEOs. They are like 1 in 5 when they make 1% of the population. Why wouldn't eugenics not lead to a spike in psychopathy?
So this goes back to something I mentioned at the beginning of the debate, where you have to be careful for the unintentional stratification and other effects that you would have, which is why I said that I wouldn't want eugenics to be implemented in a centrist or right-wing government. I'd want it in a left-wing government, preferably a socialist society in which there is no CEO at the top, but there's worker-controlled cooperatives where they elect their CEO. So the people at the top would naturally be people who are more sociable than the people who are at the top in our current system. So yeah, it's not against the concept of eugenics to acknowledge that there could be unintended side effects of the policy.
And we just gotta hope that when he makes his Frankenstein monster, it doesn't eat the village before we realize we screwed up.
They're people. They're people. Like, they're not going to be like monsters. Like this.
It's called an analogy, dude.
It's a caricature.
Can we go on? It's called an analogy. Can we move on?
From Shamus Crawford, is child molestation and suicide maladaptive?
I think so.
We might be caught up on the Q&A, so if you guys want to go into closing statements and final thoughts, I don't know, Annihilus, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I think Blind Tio just has not only a very strange view of science that I haven't seen before. He has a very strange conception of what is freedom, because he doesn't want abortion, but he wants people to reproduce in opposition to basically all the laws of personal freedom, the ability to get an abortion, or the freedom of the prospective child to be free from coercion and being coerced into this life. It's a very strange type of freedom. I mean, again, I don't think my arguments are particularly radical. I mean, it's just like, okay, I don't want people to die from Tay-Sachs disease. Like, I don't think it's exactly a very radical argument. Though, if you were a radical, you could support it too, because Tay-Sachs disease is common in Jews. Haha. No, but yeah, I think it's a general idea that reproduction is not a human right. It is basically, it's not controlling your own destiny, but you're controlling the destiny of other people. And because it's not a human right, it can be tightly regulated. I think because of the coercive factors involved in reproduction, that you need a much higher burden of proof to satisfy before you can justify bringing a new child into the world. There are more people who could use the same resources that you would be investing into an ill-formed child, that could use the same amount of resources better. Whether it's healthcare, where prevention is the cheapest form of healthcare, or whether it's orphans in need of in need of parents, or people immigrating, or if you're vegan, if you want to prevent the unnecessary deaths of hundreds of thousands of animals per person. I think there seems to be, in an ethical perspective, for whatever ethical perspective you have, there seems to be a cogent argument in favor of eugenics or anti-natalism, or just generally the control of who is or is not allowed to reproduce. So unless you literally think incest should be allowed, and that sort of thing, or it's okay to have harlequin babies, I think you should at least consider that eugenics, to some extent, it should be in within mainstream consideration. And that seems to be about it.
I think, yeah.
All right. There's a great movie that came out in the 90s, Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, and Jude Law, called Gattaca. And it's about a future society where there are designer babies. And Ethan Hawke's character is what's called a natural. And he overachieved, because until we find the gene for willpower, like, maybe the struggles in life like make us better. And like, I'm blind, I was diabetic. Like, if we take, I know he doesn't like the slippery slope argument, but if we had taken the genetic arguments of that I shouldn't be here, or I shouldn't be allowed to have children, like, I think if you were in my position, I think you would want to, well, number one, you would want to find an expert on genetics to actually talk about this, and not try to play an expert, because I from the start said I'm not a geneticist. I am curious about a lot of topics. I suggest everyone look into epigenetics. It's tied to quantum physics, which is tied to non-Euclidean geometry. And we have a lot of intelligent people that watch the stream. I also think epigenetics can refute a lot of the race realism arguments. And there's smarter people online already doing it than me. And like, I think I like to stand on the shoulders of giants. So yeah, I think that if continue the science, continue the genetic science, do the things we know in our natural world first that can improve the human condition. And then maybe in the future, once the science has irrefutable, then yeah, maybe we tinker. But at this point, there's too many questions. So that's my final statement. Thank you very much.